Hey everyone, it's Deanna with Lantern Lane Home Decor, and would you believe this chair is painted? I want to share with you today a tutorial on how I achieved the look of worn velvet on this wingback chair. I want to start off by telling you a little bit about what this chair looked like before. Notice that this fabric actually has a raised pattern to it. I really like that when I'm doing this type of a look. It helps get the texture. It draws the texture out of when I'm putting the paint on. What you want to look for when you're buying these kind of chairs to redo, to paint, is something that is very tight. There's no tears or rips. A tight grain fabric works really well. This is some type of a polyester. It just takes the paint really well. Now let's move on to the products that I'm going to be using to get this look. So the paint I'm going to use to do this chair is made by Heirloom Traditions, and it's a product called Finish All. I'm going to be using in two colors. I have Farmhouse and I have Galvanized. This paint is made specifically for fabric or leather or vinyl. The best thing I love about this paint is you don't have to do any kind of top coat after it's dry. Next thing you're going to want to have is a squirt bottle full of water, your favorite paintbrush. I happen to have a Klingon R20. I love this brush. It's my go-to for everything. And then I also have this little Worcester, it's just a small angle sash, and I can get into the crevices of the chair. You're going to be using a roller, and I use a 4-inch roller that has a 1/2-inch nap roller cover on it. This is what you'll use to apply the final coat and to really bring out the look of that velvet. Sandpaper. Anytime you're putting paint on a fabric, or actually anytime you're putting paint on anything, you're going to want to sand in between your coats. When you sand, that enables the next layer to adhere to the first layer, and then also just gives you a smooth surface, especially when you're working with fabric. At a minimum, I use a 220 grit. A lot of times I'll move up to a 400 and 600, and that really just depends on how my chair feels. If it's a pretty rough coat when I do the first one, I'll hit it with the 220, maybe down to a 150. If that's all you have, it'll work. And then just make sure you're wiping off really good in between coats, but we'll cover that more in the tutorial. One thing I found really useful when I'm doing these chairs is these pool noodles. And I picked these up at Walmart. They were on clearance for 10 cents each. So I picked up a bunch of them because I cut them up. And I'll cut them in half, and then I'll cut them in half again. I'll quarter them. So I have these pieces like this. What I do with these noodles is then I will take them and tuck them inside. And when you tuck them inside, it actually creates a nice little gap. You can get your brush in there really easily, and it allows the paint to dry while it's open like that, so you don't get those pieces sticking together. Because as soon as someone sits on this chair and pushes back, it's going to spread a little bit. And so you want to make sure that that paint is not stuck together. You'll see that I've actually applied on this chair a transfer. And this transfer is made by Redesigned by Prima. I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. I may cover it in another one, but I just want to share with you what product it was that I did use on this. Okay, I'm going to go get changed into my paint clothes, and then we can get started. Okay, I think we're ready to paint our chair now. I do clean my chairs before I do any painting. What you'll want to do is I vacuum it first with my shop vac and make sure you get in all the crevices, especially around in these trim areas. What I use to clean the chair with is I will take typically whatever kind of laundry detergent I have, mix with water in a bucket with a terry cloth rag, wring it out and wipe it down really good. Mainly you just want to get all that surface dirt and grease off. I've heard of other painters using degreaser as well. The next thing we're going to do is start painting our chair. Squirt bottle, and you just want to get your fabric a little bit wet. So just going to spray a little bit. And then I also like to get my brush wet. So I'll just squirt my brush. We're going to dip it into our paint, and now this is the easy part. We're just going to start painting. Now the reason I like the Finish All so well is because it has great coverage. I mean, you can already see I've only done one coat, or just start of one coat, and it's already got some great coverage going on. You want to make sure you're getting deep into these nooks in here. And if you've got the foam in there like I do, you can shove this in as far as you want. It's not a problem. And you know, this first coat, it's not that necessary to get it on really, really heavy. This is basically like you're doing your primer coat, essentially. That's what I like to consider my first coat to be. Your main thing is you're wanting to make sure you cover as far as getting into all the little nooks and crannies for the first coat, especially with this process or this technique, because this is going to be your base coat. We're going to build on this with the other colors afterwards, but this is what you'll see like inside these crevices and things like that. This dark will be the base. Okay, so I've got my first coat of paint on the chair. Something I wanted to point out and that you'll notice in the video is you'll see me sometimes going this way, sometimes going this way with my brush. And mainly what I'm trying to do is make sure the paint gets into the fibers of this chair. The beauty of doing this particular look, that worn velvet, is it doesn't have to be perfect because you actually kind of want it to look like it's worn and like maybe there's mist spots and things like that. Also, you've probably noticed that when I was doing the chair legs, I actually do a technique called stippling where you just pat it with your brush like this. The beauty of the finish all paint, it is a self-leveling, so the paint will even itself out and get flat. What I've got on the legs is also just the first coat, so I will do a second coat on the legs as well. I have not yet painted the chair cushion, but that's done with the exact same process. I like to set that up on a table when I work. I'll do one side and then let it dry, turn it over, and then I do the other side. I'm gonna let this dry overnight and then come back tomorrow and do my sanding and put the second coat. It's day 2 and we're ready to move on to the next step. I've already gone ahead and sanded my chair using a 220 grit sandpaper and remembering to wear my respirator mask. I like to take my items outside to sand. Then I've come back with a terry cloth rag that's just been dipped in water, so it's just a damp rag, and wiped it all down really well. Also, what I did was put a second coat on the legs of this chair with the darker color because I want to leave those legs this darker galvanized color. What I have done now is I've taken a mixture of my galvanized paint and my farmhouse paint and mixed them. I'm going to say I probably did a 2-to-1 ratio. There is no science to this. You mix whatever you want to mix together to get you just want a lighter color gray so that when it goes over this darker, you'll see a difference. So we're going to do the same process as we did yesterday. Going ahead and squirting our fabric and painting. Now you can already see that that's a much lighter coat. With these second coats, I don't want to have it be uniform. So there'll be some spots that I might paint darker. I might do 2 or 3 coats over it, and then some spots that are lighter that maybe I just hit it with 1 coat. So that gets that little bit of a, it provides that depth, and we start to see even more of that texture come out. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this chair all the way around. But I won't be hitting the legs on this. The legs are going to stay the color they are. If you want to tape off your legs, it's fine. You can be work around these chairs pretty well without having to tape. But if you're more comfortable taping, I recommend using like a yellow frog tape, something that's not going to stick to your paint that's already there. Okay, so I've got my second coat put on the chair, and you've probably noticed through the video that I went ahead and just kind of did it in all different directions and left some lighter, some darker. Because I will be coming back and sanding this also, you'll start to see the darker underneath when I sand as well. One more thing you might have noticed when I was painting is I didn't get really into these grooves, and that was intentional because I want the darker color to be still visible there. It just creates a nice contrast. It also helps with that worn look. One more thing I wanted to share, if you noticed when I was painting, as soon as I got that lighter color on, you could see the actual design of the chair showing through, that raised pattern. If you wanted to, that's a great look as well. You don't have to go to the next step, but let me show you what I would do is I would just go ahead and use that lighter color, and going over the darker color, just do a really light dry brush. And you can actually do a wash on it and just take a wet rag and just wipe it off, and just leaving the highlighted part of your chair. And that's just another little thing that you could do if you wanted to and didn't want to take it to the next step. Next, what we're going to do, go ahead and let this chair dry overnight, and then I'll show you the final step. Okay, so we've reached the part where we're going to do a second sanding. I've let the chair dry overnight. Depending on where you live, you might not have to wait that long for your chair to dry. This is where I'm going to share a tip with you on when I sand. Like I said, I want this to look like a worn velvet, so I want it to feel like it's aged. And we know when furniture over time, fabric will actually start to lay down. It gets flat, gets crushed. So I want to kind of try to achieve that look. And to do that, what I'm going to be using is a piece of wet dry sandpaper. This is a 600 grit. You can use a 400 grit. I use a sanding sponge to wrap my paper around, and then a bottle of water. So what you're going to want to do is take your squirt bottle, get your fabric wet, and you're going to give it a good dousing. So that when you start doing your rubbing, can you see that slurge that's starting to appear there? It's where you're basically reactivated your paint a little bit. You can see it on the sandpaper as well. You want that. And you'll just continue this process around the entire chair. What I like to do is keep a rag handy, a wet rag, and I'll actually just wipe off my sandpaper from time to time just to keep it from getting too much buildup on the paper itself. Now you're going to want to have a tendency to wipe this off. Don't. Resist that urge. You want to let this just dry as is because it's going to help create that worn look. Also, added bonus to this, anytime you wet sand anything, it's going to smooth your surface. The more you wet sand this, the smoother your paint's going to become, the smoother it's going to feel to the touch. I get a lot of people asking me, is the surface scratchy after you're finished? Well, if you do this, no, it's not. Well, I have my chair looking the way I want it to look. I've done the wet sanding all the way around. This is where we're going to create that look of worn spots all over the chair. I've got my farmhouse color paint in my tray here. And I'm just gonna get some paint, not a lot. If you've ever done any kind of whitewashing or dry brushing, things like that, well, dry brushing, you usually want to get even more of that paint off of the roller or brush. So I've got a little aluminum pan with a shop towel. I'm gonna take off some of that paint, and then I'm just gonna lightly start going over my chair. And what I do when I'm doing this step is I go both directions. I'll do a little this way, I'll do a little this way. The spots that are going to be the most worn are where your body is, where your arms sit. So the top of your arms here, I tried to put a little bit more on that part to make it look even more worn. And then also this part right here where your legs will be. So when you do that spot, I try to give it a really good covering, make it look super worn. Now we actually are going to go back over this one more time with sandpaper. We can wet distress just a little bit. And one more thing I want to mention about when you're working this last step is these crevices here. I tend to just push my roller in a little bit and do this. And if you remember, inside my chair here, I've created a gap using those pool noodles. And so when I take those noodles out, that fabric's going to come together. So you're really not going to see that inside anyway. And also, that area is not an area that's going to wear naturally. That area is going to be that area, you know, that part that will stay fresh looking all the time. You open it up, it's like, oh, that's the original color. Okay, so I've got the chair to where I want it. I've done all of my technique. I actually picked up a squirt bottle partway through. Sometimes I want a little bit of a muted look, and so I'll just give a quick squirt and go over that area. And then also you probably noticed that I picked up my little sash brush also. And I use that in some of the spots that I just really couldn't get to a little tight. And I just do a little pouncing with that. You can use any brush. It does not have to be a sash brush. It can be a chip brush, whatever you happen to have. You can see these vertical lines that I have throughout. The way I get those is I just take my roller and I just do it on an edge like this. And so you just want to get a nice firm touch and push it down. And those will create these nice little vertical lines throughout, and it just adds just another layer of texture to it. And while I didn't show you the whole process on the cushion, it's exactly the same as what you do with the chair. We're finished with this portion. It's actually already pretty dry, but I'm gonna go ahead and let it dry for several hours. So after the final sand coat, we'll come back and put it all together and we'll show you the finished product. Okay, so I've allowed the chair to dry overnight. I've actually gone ahead and sanded this chair. I ended up using a 400 grit first, wiped that down, and then I went back over it with a 600 grit. It's nice and smooth. At this point, you could leave it just like this, let it dry completely. Finish all paint takes 30 days to cure. Now this chair, you can sit in it tomorrow. It'll be fine. I like to give all of my pieces that I paint a little extra time to dry. So at this point, you might want to add a design to your chair like I did with my other one. I use these transfers by Redesigned by Prima. Just follow the instructions that come with the transfer. That's all I did. I don't have any tricks of the trade for it. I did wait 2 or 3 days for my paint to dry on the chair, even though, I mean, it's dry right now, but I like it to be good and dry before I apply anything like this. Then after that, what I did is I went back with a 220 sandpaper, went over it, and I really heavily distressed my stamps, the transfer, because that was the look I was going for. You don't have to do that, but that's what I chose to do. Well, we're finished, and I love the way this chair turned out, and I hope you do as well. If you have any questions for me, feel free to leave a comment or shoot me an email. You can also check me out on facebook.com/Lantern Lane Home Decor. Thanks for watching.